Right, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good start.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm Russell Poulton. I'm one of the enterprise managers for the Canal and River Trust, and that effectively means that my role is to liaise with key partners and stakeholders in and around the canal network, and also focusing on trying to bring in external and internal funding to basically improve the trust's assets. So the area that I cover includes the whole of Warwickshire, Birmingham, Coventry, Solihull, and parts of Worcestershire. So it's quite a broad area that I cover. So what I'll try and do is give you a bit of an outline of what it is the trust is about, just to give you a feel for what it is we're trying to do and the sort of things that we cover. And then I'll go on to more specifically looking at how we deal with the planning side, and particularly obviously the planning application that you mentioned at Bancroft Basin. So just a bit of background. That's a map of the network that we cover. The trust were formed in July 2012. Which was in effect the largest transfer of assets to the third sector, taking over control of the assets from what was British Waterways. We've got a 15-year contract with central government through DEFRA, and that it comes in the form of a grant. We're currently going through that process of renegotiation. That's a bit of an ongoing negotiation, and I suspect that will take will carry on for a number of years before we get that sorted out. There's across the whole of the trust, it's 2,000 miles of historic canals and river navigations. It's not all rivers. It was a split. It was basically split between ourselves and the Environment Agency, who took on most of certainly the non-navigable rivers. So the trust took on more of the navigable ones, but in terms of 2,000 miles of historic canals, 72 reservoirs, and that overall equates to 2/3 of the national network. So some canals are actually in separate ownership. So there are trusts that actually run that run some of the canals. It's the third largest historic estate in the UK. The National Trust is the largest, and that includes lots of listed buildings, listed locks. We've got all manner of structures across the network that we need to keep in good order. In terms of users, we've got 4.3 million regular users and between 15 to 20 unique visitors every year. So there's a lot of people that use the canals in terms of how we in terms of benefiting from what it is we're doing. So in terms of our vision, the idea for the trust really is that it's a waterways and a wellbeing charity. So it's not just about keeping the waterways open, although that is part of that's our statutory function. And the idea is to looking well beyond that area. So we're looking at living waterways as a way of transforming places and enriching lives. That's the vision. And the idea is that by caring for our waterways and securing their future, we can help to improve everyone's well-being. And to do that, we've got 6 key outcomes. And the idea is that these are measurable, and these are the things that we are then, people can see how it is we're doing against each of those points. The first one, health, well-being and happiness. It's very much about connecting people and places. The idea that living by water or connecting by water really does make you feel happier. There's research that backs that up. That actually that's something that we're really building on and trying to get that message out that it is it's a really positive place to be. and this has particularly come out during the pandemic, where we've found that there's been a massive increase in people using accessing towpaths and canals across the country, particularly in urban areas, and those include people who probably wouldn't have gone to them before and actually realised they were there. Engaging people and cohesive communities. This is about reaching out to different communities. So rather than it being passive, we're actually looking to engage with the various communities. So this includes boating communities, as well as the various ones that various communities in and around our canals. So that's very much about that positive engagement and getting people engaged in terms of what they might be able to do in and around our canals. Learning and enhancing skills, as it says, this essentially some of this comes around some of the volunteering opportunities that we have across the network. We very much rely on our volunteering teams, who are the lifeblood of the trust, in terms of trying to keep it keep the waterways clear, keep the reducing the level of litter and general maintenance, and particularly around things like lock keeping as well. Our volunteer lock keepers are a fantastic asset. Prosperous and connected places. This is more about the creating a sense of place. Some of this relates to how we connect with developments in and around the canal, but also in terms of the things that we can do to make places better. So this includes things like towpath improvements, access improvements, things like signage and wayfinding, all going together to try and connect with the wider area in terms of how we can make places, make the canals an integrated part of the community. Green and blue futures. This is very much around the likes of, you've got things like air quality, water supply and drainage, the roles that the canal can play in those aspects, in terms of reducing pollution and waste. And where we've used, so this includes where we've used the towpaths are, we've got gas mains, utilities use the towpaths, and also for where we've got surface water drainage, or where water from the canal can be used for cooling and heating. And then the cultural and environmental assets. So this is around our the various listed buildings and listed structures and various other buildings and assets that we've got across the country, and the idea to try and see how we can make best use of them, and see how we can try and connect and enhance those. And this also includes environmental assets. So in terms of the West Midlands waterways, I don't know how well you can see that, but that shows the ones within the West Midlands region. So this is, I should point out that it's the wider West Midlands region, so we include, it goes up to Shropshire and Stoke in the north, and then down to Stratford. So the waterways are divided into 6 regions, and the West Midlands is the largest by far, with 900 kilometres of canal within the area, particularly based around the West Midlands conurbation. And what's interesting is that we've got 1.75 million people within 0.6 of miles of their local canal. So actually the opportunity to reach out to people who are close to the canal and perhaps not using that as a resource, or in looking into in terms of why that is, and how we can better reach out to them. At the moment, we've got something like over 7,000 boats use the canals each year. We've seen, obviously, with lockdown, that was, boats were unable to move, but we've seen a massive increase now, and most of the hire boats now are fully booked and are probably likely to be for the foreseeable future. And then there's an indication there of the extent to which towpath use has gone up. Certainly in Sandwell, you know, it's 240%, showing from our towpath counters. And then it's I mentioned about the volunteers. We had something like 100. I'm not sure whether that's actually last year or that's probably the previous year. But 160,000 hours were given by volunteers last year in the region, in the West Midlands region. So in terms of the canals certainly within Warwickshire, obviously we've got the Stratford Canal, but we've got another 5. You've got the Grand Union, the Oxford, and then in the north you've got the Coventry, the Ashby, and then a bit of the Birmingham and Fazeley Canal. So there you go, and that's the West Midlands Waterways one, and so that's the areas that we cover. I should point out that we don't cover the Avon. It's the Avon Navigation Trust that deal with that. So basically, our interest ends at Bancroft Basin, where the lock goes into the Avon. And in terms of one of the other things, just to probably emphasise, is around one of the things that we're trying to do is protect and promote, and it's particularly the natural environment. And one of our charitable objectives is basically to improve, basically for the public benefit, the conservation, protection and improvement of the natural environment and landscape of the inland waterways. And so this is very much around the natural heritage. So this can include, encouraging natural heritage, including as simple as putting wildflowers and pollinators along the towpath, which is something that we're trying to encourage. Looking at certainly the water quality in terms of trying to encourage native species. We've got 20 SSSIs and 3 special areas of conservation, SACs, within the region as well, that we look after. And a lot of what we're trying to do is, so even where we're doing towpath improvements, we're trying to improve, integrate that with improvements to the natural environment as well. So it's not just about the physical environment here. This is very much around all aspects of it, and particularly using the canal as a green corridor, with the important aspect that we're trying to link with wider green spaces. I think that's something that we're always conscious of. So some of the wider things that we're trying to do, I mentioned about reaching out to communities, and some of this includes specific activities, particularly on the back of we've got the Commonwealth Games coming up, so there's a bit of an impetus then to try and engage with people. So this can include regular sport and cultural activities, active travel routes, promoting the certain routes for cycling and walking, as well as we've got what's known as a Let's programme, which I'll mention on the next slide. And then we've got things like flagship events, so events that can promote use of the waterways, and things like that. So that's something that we're really keen to try and improve and try and get people back in, particularly in places with clearly Stratford has been really badly hit by the pandemic, in terms of where in terms of visitors and visitor numbers. So it's actually looking at well, how can we promote the area and the region for people to use for big events or for canal related boating events, that type of thing, and how we can collaborate with partners. Obviously we've got the Coventry City of Culture at the moment, and there's a number of joint activities that we're doing on the back of that to try and encourage people to look at the canal and look at them in a slightly different way. And I mentioned the Let's program, and it's the idea is that it can go with anything. So Let's Fish, there's a series of it might be fishing events across the country. It could be based on in local areas. It can go to anything. Let's perform, let's run, let's walk, let's cycle, let's paddle. The important thing is it's getting people to try different things. Let's see what works in certain areas. It's not going to work in all areas. We need to make sure it ties in with other things that we're doing, but it's very much around trying to get that activity and well-being side brought forward. And this can include things like we're looking very much around the health side, and some of the prescription, walking by prescription, that type of activity, and trying to get in, and this might be done by whether it's done with by the trust ourselves or with partners. We've got a community engagement team that work across the region, so it's something that we're trying to bring everyone together to try and let's look at what we can do here. So that's more about the trust in general. This is I'll move now on to the specifics around the planning side and what we do and how we deal with planning applications, in terms of that, and how we bring those forward. So in effect, what we're doing is we're looking at the key, I suppose, the key principles here. Effectively, we're trying to utilise the planning system to champion the benefits that our waterways offer. This includes protecting the trust's assets, so from things like inappropriate development, but also addressing trying to emphasise the positive benefits of water. We find that a lot of developers are very keen to promote the fact that they are next to water, whether it's a river or a canal. They can often add a premium to what they charge, and the pricing side. So it's something that they see as very much a positive thing, and I think it's something that we're trying to emphasise, how we might bring that forward. Generating value. Some of this is around how the trust ourselves bring some of this forward, how we operate, in terms of how we might generate some value on the back of some of these. So it might be that this comes from new bridge accesses, new accesses or new bridges that we are, and how we can benefit from that in terms of the premiums commercial agreements we might charge on the back of that. How that might link with improving the wider access to other areas, and ultimately it's around this idea that creating sustainable and accessible places. It's about trying to improve the area where people live, and how that comes forward. So in terms of the planning applications, planning applications, we're generally we've got two sides of it. One is as a statutory consultee, usually within, I think there's a buffer zone of 150 metres either side of the canal, where we are consulted on applications. It's usually about 50 metres if it's just a small application, but there's two sides of it. So as a statutory role, but then as also as a landowner, because often it's we need to distinguish between the two in terms of the influence or the impact it might have on us as a general idea, as opposed to the looking at something from a landowner's point of view, which we may have a different view on. One of the key things to bear in mind is that, as it says there, 96% of waterside land is in third-party control. Generally, we'll own the towpath and perhaps a bit behind it. Generally on the offside, We don't tend to own any of it. So it's important in terms of how we, and particularly around things like walls and development that comes on, how we then engage. So we have to try and get engaged at the early stage. You can see on the picture of the housing, you know, this is one of the things that we're trying to move away from, where developments turn their backs on the canal. The idea is that we want developments to open up, to celebrate the canal and improve the access, and enhance the qualities that people want to use. And it's a bit of an ongoing battle, I think. In certain places and certain local authorities, it's worked really well, and we've got a really good relationship. In others, it's sometimes it's more difficult, and it depends how developers approach this and how we might bring this forward. What we always try and encourage people is to come and talk to us at the earliest possible stages. The idea being that the earliest time we can, you know, the sooner we get a conversation going, the sooner we can point out any issues we might have, and often we'll offer potential solutions, or at least some ideas of how we can get around some of the issues that may arise. So, as I mentioned, there's two key elements to the planning side. Is the plan making itself, so how you setting out a plan for, you know, and how an area will develop over time to guide the future development. So this will be around the local plan itself. I'll come on to that in a minute. And then the development management side. So this is when you get the planning applications that come in. And then that's how the engagement works at that stage. So in terms of the local planning side, this can include, you've got the local plan, but you've also got various other ones. So you've got transport plans, you've got things like things that are coming forward now, in particular the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's those are the ones that it's important from the trust side to basically make sure that we've got the hooks in those policies that enable us then to comment then on the individual planning applications, but making sure that those plans actually take account of what the canal is about, the canal network, and what it is we're trying to do. So as it's got all around there, you know, this is not just about the waterway itself. This is around design, health and well-being. It's how sites are allocated, tourism, freight, transport. It's a whole range of different elements that go to making up and emphasising how much you know, what influence the canal has, or the canal network has on certainly on the place making and how the local environment is. So it's very important that we get engaged at all of those stages with all of those. So obviously you can see with across the whole of the network, there's a hell of a lot of local authorities that we engage with. So it's important that we keep on top of those of all of that, and then seeing how we can best influence it, and seeing how we can move those things forward. And one of the interesting things is that when in terms of our internal consultation, is it's not just when you come to the trust in terms of from a statutory consultee point of view. Actually, we bring in a whole load of different skills. So we get comments on each planning application from the likes of our boating business side, fishing, engineering. So we've got specialists for bridges, for reservoirs, urban design. We've got a national urban design team, hydrology, delivery planning, and then there's Also, we've got the likes of myself would comment on it in terms of what other things. We've got ecologists, and the important thing with that is that, again, it's getting that conversation going with developers at the early stage, because we can bring all of those skills to bear from a planning perspective, and we can just bring in all of those different approaches, different ideas that can actually help enhance a planning application. If we're just consulted right at the last or just through the formal process at the it's late in the day to start some of those conversations. Certainly when you're looking at the potential impact of building right up to the edge of the canal, it can bring lots of various things. It's the same with bridges, new accesses. The early conversations help bring things forward and help us to iron out a few of those issues at the earliest possible stage. In terms of how we respond, it just sets out, we can ask for further information. We tend to ask for conditions on to address key issues. There's the likes of Section 106s to see how we might be able to address those, or information notes for planning permission, and a lot of that revolves around how they might be working on or near our land. So we've got a specific process that developers have to sign up to, called out it's our code of practice, and that's very much about making sure that when developments go ahead, that we're working closely with them, and we're clear about what method it is and how they're going about it, and making sure that it's from a health and safety perspective, but also from a structural and approach, that it's something that won't cause us problems. Because once you get one of these problems, it's harder to deal with if you've got a major issue on the edge of the canal. Generally, we're seen as quite quite proactive and positive. It's rare that we object. We will always try and find a way forward if we can. Although, as we'll come on to one of the recent planning applications, we'll see that's not always the case. But yes, we tend to be. We know that we're not always able to influence things as well as we might want to, but we're generally very positive and try and engage with both the local authority and any applicant as far as possible. And coming on to the application that was mentioned at the start, and it was the one for Bancroft Gardens. So it was very much around the idea of the open market, and we were actually consulted as both a statutory consultee and as an adjacent landowner. And I think, to be honest, it's a major issue I've put there. We were unable to make a substantive response due to the lack of information, and this was one of the key issues that we'd had from this, was the fact that there was just so little information that we could go on, which caused just major problems for us as both a landowner and as a statutory consultee. And as an example, there was a lack of information on all sides, in terms of the idea was that it was for a market, but there was reference to leisure, recreation, ticket sales, various other aspects, any other associated developments which wasn't referred to, which wasn't elaborated on. And in particular, our concerns were around things like naturally operational access, emergency services, how they would get to the basin, a lack of control in terms of the restrictions on the planning application. It seemed to be rather open-ended, in terms of what impact it may have had. And particularly this is in an area of restraint, referred to in the core strategy, and there was no real evidence that had been addressed. It's interesting, and I know the Stratford Society as well had their objection in as well. And one of the things we were saying was we were forced to object in many ways because of this lack of information. There was no initial conversation with us which would have helped try and move things forward, and that rather made it difficult to even make comments on, because we just didn't have any information to do this. So it's just interesting. In the end, it was I think it was withdrawn rather than refused, but it was one of those ones where it raised a whole range of issues that could perhaps have been resolved if we'd have had an early discussion and looked at how it might have evolved, or how it might have come to fruition. But certainly, it's not something that we're prepared to sit back and have, particularly at that side where the northern end by the bridge. This is where your people. The issue with the canal around here is that it is rather tucked away once you get outside the basin. So we're really keen to see that that people can use the canal there. So anything that starts to block it off or causes issues around that side is something that we're far from. It's not something that we'd be happy with going forward. So that was that's one of those examples. Interestingly, we haven't had a huge number of planning applications over the last 12 months. Certainly in Stratford, we have had quite a lot in other parts of the West Midlands, but for some reason, we've not had a huge amount. So that's where we are. But we don't, as I should saying again, we don't cover the River Avon. So certainly some of the riverside work is not something that comes under our remit, as it were. So in terms of some of the other side, the other things that we've got in terms of local things that might be of interest. Now we've got the towpath improvements that are they're nearly completed now, and I'll just come on to those. I've mentioned the Bancroft Gardens one, and I'll mention a couple of the others as well as I go forward there. So in terms of the towpath improvements, I'm reliably informed that they're actually finishing off what's you can see on the pictures there, where it's got the tarmac surfacing, and what we have now is it's the final surface dressing. So it's a sort of a spray and chip finish that sort of softens it up and makes it look a little bit more attractive and less like a normal roadway. So that should be, they're either on site now or they're about to. So that should be finished within a few days, really. Just as a bit of background to that, to where that came from. To do towpath improvements, we generally need third-party funding. We need to bring in funding to be able to do that. And in this case, we got it through. It was the Rural Development Programme for England. So it's actually European funding. By the Rural Payments Agency, and it was nearly £290,000 worth of funding that we got there. And I know it says Rural Development Programme, but the idea was this was based around support for investments, particularly around recreational infrastructure and tourism. So this was very much about seen as a gateway to the Warwickshire countryside. So that's why it was that's the justification that we went for, and it was for 800 metres of towpath from the Birmingham Road back to Bancroft Basin. Now, what we'll be doing as well as part of that is putting improved signage in as well. And that also includes, we're looking to do some signage in the basin itself as well. We've got some really old signs there, so we're looking to try and upgrade those, as well as putting some a bit more interpretation and a bit more information about what is there. So, as I say, that should be done any time now. So I'll be able to get. I was checking to see whether we had any updated photographs of the final works, but it looks like I'll have to wait a few more days for that. But I'm sure you'll be able to see those soon. And certainly the difference it made. Certainly when I went there, it probably would have been in, I don't know, January, February last year. Certainly the puddles and the mud that was along certain parts of that route. It's just it's great to see how we can improve things in this way. Commonwealth Games, it's not directly impacting on Stratford, but it's what's interesting in terms of from a canal perspective in the wider area is very much around is how accessible a lot of the venues are within easy reach of the canal, which is something that we're really trying to work closely with the Games Committee to try and improve that and improve that connectivity, so that people can see that as an alternative route to get there, rather than just using the either driving or going to these areas. So particularly in terms of you can see there you've got Leamington and Warwick with two of the venues. And it's something that we've tried to focus on, some of the access points, improve the access and some of the signage, particularly along those areas, so people can see that as an alternative route, either between Warwick and Leamington or certainly beyond. And we see that as very much part of it is trying to make the most of the fact that there'll be visitors coming into the region and into these particular areas. But also it's in terms of the wider legacy side. So we don't just see it as a case of just making a few improvements to get a few people in for the duration of the games. It's very much about trying to make sure that we can get people seeing that as part of that wider network. Certainly would have liked to have improved the towpath from between Warwick and Leamington, but I think that's something that's going to take a little bit longer, but something that certainly we're having conversations with, and it's certainly something that we'll be looking to try and bring forward. And it's and like I say, it's trying to to build on the fact that people will be coming into the region, and let's showcase what we can, what we've got to offer, and seeing what the potential is. And the final bit is around it's something that we're doing working with Warwickshire County Council, and it's called a Waterways strategy, or it is actually quite a brief document really. It's but the idea it stemmed from the heritage and cultural strategy that the county has, and what we found is that their three key elements were around health and well-being, sense of place, and economic vibrancy. And actually that just aligned perfectly with what we were trying to do. So it made sense to actually let's have a look at this strategy and develop a waterways strategy on the back of it, as a way of, and as I say there, in terms of the vision, it's very much about promoting and protecting the county's waterways from an environmental perspective in terms of wildlife, but also from as a desirable setting for residents, visitors and businesses. And that way of how can we improve how can we encourage people to connect people and places via the waterways network. So we developed this plan in partnership with the county, and including the Wildlife Trust and the Environment Agency and a couple of others. It's due to be approved at the County Council Cabinet in September. And basically the idea is that we'll come up with it's not a long document, it's something that's going to be looked at as a way of, let's develop an action plan to see what practically can we do to improve the waterways in across the county. One of the key things that we're looking at as part of this is doing a survey of all of the towpaths. It's something that we're rolling out across the country, but certainly it's something that we'd like to focus on here. We've found, particularly with during lockdown, that we've had lots of requests for improvements to the towpath and seeing what things that we can do there. Ideally, what we'd like to do is look at a longer stretch, or look at key areas which we can focus on. And this rather helps us bring this forward rather than just doing it piecemeal. And let's try and focus some of the resources that we can bring to bear on this. So I'd say watch out for that, because that will be hopefully approved in September, and then we'll be looking to do quite a few things on the back of that to try and bring that forward. And I think that's it. So it's over to questions.